Hey, Joanne.
Hey. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Joanne.
Good morning, Andy.
Good morning.
I see we have
Good morning.
makeup on for our meeting.
I sure do.
Me too.
I told, did you realize I was afraid? I was afraid to point the camera in Charlie's direction. No, she was officially awake yet.
Dan,
Let me
you're
see.
now the host.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
How do I mute everyone? Or I guess I don't want to mute everyone.
On yours now, there should be, if you click on participants, do you see that at the bottom, participants?
Yeah.
The bottom bar. If you kind of move
Okay.
your cursor to the bottom of the picture, you'll
Yeah,
a
I
bar
found
will
it.
come up. Click on participants.
Yeah, I found that.
And
So
then
now,
you should be able on the right-hand side to mute all or unmute all. Do you see it?
mute all. Okay. Everyone's muted now. I can unmute.
well, we're actually better off sitting on that side of the table because the lighting's better.
Okay, I figured out how to. Can you hear me, Joanne?
Yes.
I figured out how to unmute it. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah,
Thank you for
I'm new at the voice part. I've been using Zoom, and I actually enjoy the services on the internet. So this is a first for me. I am now in the 21st century.
Awesome.
Except it says you're logged in twice. You're on here twice.
Sorry. What do I do now?
Are you on two devices?
No, same device. It's a very smart phone.
Oh, I don't know. Usually when you see someone's name twice, it means they're maybe on a cell phone and a laptop.
Nope. You know what I'll do? I'll log out, and then I'll log back in.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter. You can be on here twice.
Well, let me see
It doesn't
something
cost
here.
extra.
I'm going to see something here.
You might see my dog stealing napkins. She almost got your napkin. Who is this? Stu Shapiro.
Yeah, you can do it without, it looked so much better yesterday.
It's a nice ceiling.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Joanne.
Joanne, can you hear me?
Yep. I hear you.
Joanne, it's Ann. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Ann. How are you?
Good, but obviously invisible since I just woke up, so I'm going to just do audio.
That's okay.
You look nice.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
I'll see you in a bit. I'm going to go get some coffee.
All right. Same.
It's right here, honey.
You need an avatar.
Yeah, how to turn it on?
Yeah. Thanks.
I see.
I think I'm back.
You're back.
Wonderful. Good to see you again. And you can hear me, which is 2 for 2.
Yeah. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Stu.
Hi, you guys. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Ed.
Hi, Ed.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, does everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Marina.
Hi, Marina.
Hi.
I have no
All right,
idea.
I'm gonna go get my coffee.
Hey.
Where?
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
Hi, Rabbi Alex.
I guess we do.
Hi, putting my virtual background and oh, I'm actually named the right thing.
A virtual backdrop.
Oh, I love that.
Oh.
Yeah, because I'm in my car, so it does it for my phone. It works.
Oh.
Computer.
How nice.
Looks good, but it looks so different.
You want to do
Oh, I see Deborah. Oh,
Hi, Rabbi Alex.
hi. Oh, it's great to see everyone. You guys are the
Yeah,
early
Go
birds.
ahead.
believe it. Yes.
We don't look too good.
You see that's my wedding canopy, the chuppah behind us.
Oh.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Much cleaner than my car.
Okay. More people. Come on in.
You want a cup of coffee?
Yeah. There we go. Oh, this is great. Is he Nathan?
Yes. This is almost like Romper Room.
It's actually not a bad way to get together.
Well, it could be better, but
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
I find that for work, I've worked remotely a lot, and it's funny. What I find is that if you get to see people, not face to face as well, it's a good way of staying in contact. I mean, it's not a substitute for live, but it's certainly. I found we'd get together in meetings, and it was like we just saw each other. We have a chat also. Good. There we go.
You see that?
See, you need to be on the meeting. I get in here. You won't say it, but you're not.
I don't need to be in there. Sure. I'll stick my head in there. See? There we are.
How do you do that?
Hey. Look at this office.
The chat function should be on your screen, maybe on the bottom.
Yeah,
Or
I
if you're
see.
on the phone. On the phone, it's on the separate box.
Yeah.
You also, if you don't know how to use Zoom, there's a gallery view on the computer, and then there's also the speaker view, which only is the one speaking. So you can go to either.
Are you driving?
No, are you kidding? Where am I going to go? I'm texting everyone. Yeah, no, we're homebound. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah.
My kid said, "Are you going to work? I thought you only go to work on Fridays."
Well, you made it to the synagogue on Friday, and it was beautiful. We got a chance to see the furniture with nobody else but you two on there, and it was terrific.
Oh, and yeah, the furniture looked great. It was sad not seeing everyone else, though.
But it's better when there's lots of people around.
Oh, so much better. So much better.
Okay, I tried the chat function.
There.
Okay.
Wait a minute. You come on the scene.
I see your chat, Brian.
Zoom machine.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
It took me a long time to get the audio so I could hear you. I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's a learning curve for everybody, that's for sure.
And we did it. Anyway,
Stu Shapiro, you're not from University of Buffalo, are you?
I am.
You know a guy named Dennis Lynch?
Dennis, I don't think so.
Okay, different Stu Shapiro.
There's a lawyer, Stu Shapiro, who is not me.
Yeah, we can. Weekend.
Somebody has, see, he has a pen, he has a door in his place.
Dan,
Oh,
Yeah.
Ryan.
should I try to, actually, no, I'm not sure. Actually, I can't now. When I'm the
Oh, there's
host,
Joanne.
I can try to stream it onto Facebook Live.
That'll be good.
All right. Can you give, I'm going to reclaim the host for a moment.
Yeah.
You can make me co-host, then we both have control of it.
This sounds like a Catholic service.
Did everybody sit in alphabetical order?
How do I do that?
I don't know.
Andy, do you know how to make someone a co-host?
No, I do not.
Okay, well,
I will
let me,
poke around in the meantime.
all right, now I'm the host and I'm going to,
I would just click on my name where it says more.
right.
Let's get yours. I hate eating in the office.
So get that mail up again. I thought I brought the mail.
I thought we put
Like
the
that.
Zoom here.
Yeah, don't use, first go to the mail. And the mail. I said you scroll up and where it says click here to join. Okay.
I will say I miss seeing all of you.
Good morning.
Morning, Audrey.
This page is Zoom. My name.
Yeah, that's for the label. So
Just Karen? What did you say?
I said Stu Shapiro.
Now, if we just had a speaker, we'd be great.
Yeah. Do you need me to call him? Is everything good?
I mean,
with
he
that?
knows.
Okay. He knows how to get on, right?
Yeah, I said he's used it before. I said just click on the, the email.
Oh, so somebody else has a nice background. That's Audrey, huh?
Yeah, that's Italy.
Ah,
Look at that. Hey,
nice. I got to figure out how to do this now. Instead of doing my kitchen.
Deborah, you got HP.
Access
Lunch and-
Yes. So
notifications?
no,
Do what?
don't want.
No, no.
Presentation.
So it's
All
like,
using internet on.
yes.
There he is. Hello, Dr. Faden.
Morning.
We have a speaker.
Somebody has their like phone and computer on, so it's getting feedback. That's what's happening.
Yeah, those people who aren't talking should mute their microphones.
Ow.
Good morning, Marina.
Good morning, Howard. If you
Yeah,
look
how
at
do
the
we-
bottom of your screen, it'll be a little, there should be a microphone and you just hit mute.
Yeah.
And
Also,
you'll mute everyone except Dr. Faden once we start.
if you
I
want,
don't see.
I'm here.
Yeah, there we go.
I was also going to say is that you can I'm getting feedback. You can temporarily also close the video if you want to get up or you want to eat a sandwich while we're doing this so that you're not seen eating it or doing something else. But then you just click on it again and it starts open up, okay?
Okay, why don't you get mute so you don't get.
I'm still not sure I see this mute button.
If you move your mouse or your cursor down to the bottom,
It's
a
an
menu-
iPad.
a menu opens up.
It doesn't have a mouse or cursor. It's an iPad.
Yep. Okay.
It's okay. I think Dan can mute all of us except for the speaker. And if
That
you
would
want to
be
be,
good.
I'm gonna
if
do
you
that.
want to
And-
raise your hand
And
you
for
can do
those
it.
on an iPad, sometimes it's at the top of the screen. Just tap on the iPad and you'll see the mute button. You'll see a mute, start video, share content, participate.
So my first question, Dan, to you is, can you see me well?
We can see you well.
Okay. So just let me know when you want to start.
Okay, it's 9:30. We'll give a few more minutes for stragglers.
All right.
And then tap on that microphone.
Mute yourself.
Joanne, did you try and make me co-host?
I don't know how to do that, but I think we're on Facebook Live.
Okay.
Meeting is now streaming on Facebook Live.
Oh, shoot, I don't have Facebook.
Sharing the screen, and then it blanked out half the people.
Yeah, something just happened to my screen.
Yeah,
So,
I'm seeing
Me too.
Adrian Crandall's screen.
yeah, there's something, okay, whatever happened just now, it moved everything off to, okay.
There we go.
Okay, now you're back. Yes, that's the difference between gallery view and live speaker view. When you have the big close-up of a person, you're in live speaker view, and that's what you'll see the person talking. And when you have all the little pictures, you're in gallery view.
Oh,
But actually,
someone
okay,
else is sharing a screen now.
yeah, this is,
Yeah, somebody.
I disappeared.
So, so the thing to do, I think, is to ask everybody who's not speaking to be on mute and let one person control the meeting, and then let the good doctor speak. And you can even send a text if you want to ask a question, which will keep as many people from unmuting as possible. And if you want to turn off your video, it just helps a little with the bandwidth, but no big deal.
The major portion of my screen now is a bird sitting on a branch.
Mine too.
Mine too.
That came from somebody's computer.
It is.
And all of this started to happen when we went on Facebook.
Hey, Mindy.
The only thing I could do is go off Facebook. But
Someone,
I think
someone
it's
must have
not-
clicked on share screen.
Yeah, but
Yeah, guys,
We're seeing their screen.
it looks like I'm the only millennial on the
Coffee.
call. So Sandy, Sada, you want to reduce your shared screen. Everybody in their lower left-hand corner has a mute button, and you want to end up being in gallery view, not in live speaker view, so that you can see everybody, which is on the upper right-hand side. Hope that's helpful.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
now I have nothing but my Google page in front of my screen.
Joanne?
Yeah, I'm going back to add you. One
Thank you.
second.
I'm gonna wait till it starts.
Just touch the Google screen and it'll go small and you'll go big.
No, that's not
No.
happening.
I'm gonna mute it. We turn the volume down.
Okay.
Okay.
whoever is the official host, Dan, you're the host. You need to reclaim host and stop.
Okay, I'm the host again now. How do I get?
Confusing.
Okay, whatever. I don't know if I should close that screen or not. I might disappear.
Yeah. Millennial help.
Hey, hi guys, it's Jess again. Dan Kester, you're now the host. Joanne shared it with you. So you're going to cancel Sandy Sada's screen share.
Sandy Sada's screen did it. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, now I still have just a Google page and I don't see myself.
I have Sandy on there, but I don't have, there's no, I'm trying to click.
On the very top, Dan, you're going to see view options, and you're going to go down to exit Sandy Sada's shared screen. And Sandy, if you're listening, I know.
There you go.
Perfect. Hooray.
No one touch their computer.
Thank you, Jessica.
Okay, now, I think, does everyone see me? Because I don't see me.
Yes.
Yes.
We see you.
Yes.
Okay, so
I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna start by muting everyone except myself and Dr. Faden.
okay, and I'd like to see myself because I want to make sure that, oops, I don't see, I disappeared. I have to tell you that. And I didn't stop video.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, we see you.
If you can go to the bottom left of your, on the bar,
Yeah.
Dr. Faden, there should be a video button that you can click, the bottom left corner.
Okay, but if I click the button, it says stop video. That's the button.
Video is on.
No,
Yeah.
so Dr. Faden, you're in active speaker view and not gallery view would be my expectation. When you see your buttons at the top, if you're on an iPad,
No, I'm
see
on a computer.
Okay,
Okay.
great. So I'm also on a computer. On the upper right-hand side, you'll see enter full screen and speaker view or gallery view.
Say that again.
Dan, can you make sure everybody is muted? So Dr. Faden, on the
Yes.
right-hand side and
Yes.
the upper right, you'll see
Yes.
speaker view or gallery view.
Yes.
You can toggle between the two to either see yourself and me as the main speaker. So it changes the screen based on who is speaking.
All I have is gallery view. There's nothing about speaker view there.
Okay, so if you click on gallery view,
Yeah. Okay, now I see everybody.
great. And can you find yourself?
I can. This is like Find Waldo in the screen right now.
Yeah, so I'm going to mute myself now, but good morning, everyone.
Okay.
and just before we get started, this is Judy. I can see a number of people are not muted. I'll read you off.
I'm gonna
Susan
mute
King.
everyone when we start.
Okay.
I'm going to do that now. Okay, now everyone is muted. I'm going to unmute our speaker, so he's unmuted.
Okay.
Everyone can unmute themselves if you want to, do a question or whatever. But if you do that, please remute yourself afterwards, and that's to keep all the background noise from interfering with the talk. Okay, let's start by welcoming everyone. This is a new way for us to do this men's group meeting. I apologize for not delivering bagels and Lux to each of you. Very few announcements. As you know, we had Mark Polenkar's scheduled 2 weeks ago, and he canceled like 2 days before the talk because that was right when the things exploded here. His office said he would be happy to come speak to us at some point in the future once all this is finished. No poker games until further notice. We had a couple more speakers scheduled, and that was Ronna Glickman talking about social media, Scott Weinstein, who has a company that deals with the epidemic now. He was going to speak, and also Steve Sugarman talking about mediation as an alternative to lawsuits. And all of these people come eventually, either maybe we'll do more Zoom meetings or else once we can be back in the synagogue. I want to thank Joanne and Rabbi Alex for organizing this. Thank you. A couple of things about the Zoom. I think everyone's kind of got figured out now. The key thing is the mute button, bottom left corner. If you want to jump in and say something, and I'll let Dr. Faden tell us if he wants people to hold questions to the end or to interrupt. But if you do want to speak, click the mute button, then we can hear you. When you're done, please remute yourself so we don't have loud background noise. You can do some fun stuff with this Zoom. You can change your background, be in different places. And again, the top right corner, you can choose whether to be on speaker view where you just see the speaker, or you can be in gallery view where you can see everyone, and that's up to you. Okay, Howard Faden is a professor at the UB Medical School in pediatrics. His specialty is infectious diseases. He has worked at Children's Hospital for 43 years and as chief of infectious diseases for 25 years. So he's obviously the person you want to hear from this week. I think if I understand it right, you're also a neighbor of Rabbi Alex.
That's correct.
And that's how we made the connection. So with that said, I will turn this over to Dr. Faden. And thank you very much for doing this today.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say good morning to everybody. And this technology is amazing because within a short period of time, all of our conferences at the medical school have gone through this process. And it works fairly smoothly, okay? But people should be aware that if you're on video, we can see you, whatever you're doing, okay? And if your mic isn't muted, we can hear what you're saying, even what you're whispering. So be cognizant of that. I do want to compliment all the government people who have administered this problem in New York State, from the governor down to the county executive to Dr. Burstein in the health department. I think they're doing a superb job, okay? So I'll begin by saying I do have a connection with someone in China who I collaborate with. And it had to do with gut microbiome type of literature that we've published on. But lately it has involved the coronavirus, okay? And in my past, I have published 2 articles on the coronavirus. So I can begin by telling you that coronavirus gets its name from its appearance on an electron microscope. It looks like a crown. So you know how a crown has peaks, little spikes, and then sometimes little balls on the end? That's the way the virus looks. So somebody called it a coronavirus. There are 7 types of coronaviruses. 4 of them fit into our respiratory virus group of viruses that appear each winter and spring in the United States. So every winter and spring, we have 1 or more of the standard coronaviruses circulating. And what this virus typically does is it causes upper respiratory tract illness, which is mostly virus and maybe a cold and a mild sore throat. We don't know you have coronavirus because there's really no test that we have available in most of the labs to diagnose coronavirus. It doesn't even grow in tissue culture, which is the gold standard of a virologist. So we know it appears, we don't know how often, and we don't know if you have it. Now that's the one virus that I can tell you is common in the United States, okay? But what has happened over the past 20 years is that coronaviruses have appeared in animals too. And the animal that's the culprit in all of this is the bat. And it began in China. And the bat, for some strange reason we don't understand, is able to carry a variety of viruses without getting sick. And it's something odd, and people are writing about it now. And by the way, there are over 1,000 types of bats. And so a certain kind of bat is able to carry a certain kind of virus. But their immune system is really intriguing because they can have these multiple viral infections and not manifest any illness. But the bat then transmits it to another animal. And in the case of SARS, that animal was something called a civet. A civet is a little kind of cat that is sold in the marketplace in China. Now, SARS was devastating because it spread and had a mortality rate of 10% associated with it, okay? But we really didn't see much of that here. It did appear in Canada and China and Japan, but it was somewhat limited, and then it died out. So the kind of coronaviruses that I began talking about were the ones that occur every year in the United States. SARS, which went from bat to civet to human, declined and disappeared. Then the next odd coronavirus to appear was something causes a disease called MERS, by the way, SARS is severe acute respiratory syndrome, and MERS is Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. And that began in the Middle East. But once again, it was the bat that transmitted it to another animal. And in the Middle East, that other animal was the camel. So anyone who had contact with the camel, and it turns out that Saudi Arabia was the epicenter for this, okay? They then ran a risk of getting MERS. Now, MERS was more severe, and that has not disappeared. And the mortality rate with MERS is around 30%, which is devastating. And in the Middle East, the people who were at highest risk of getting it were men, older men, and men with diabetes. And apparently in Saudi Arabia, diabetes is very common. So in December of this year, we saw a new episode of a coronavirus that entered a bat, and from that bat, it was transmitted to another animal. And the debate right now is, what is the animal? And it looks like it's a little anteater called a pangolin, Pangolin. And that's sold in the marketplace in China. Now, why is China the hotbed? It's because they have large open marketplaces where they handle a lot of live animals, and the animal handlers in the marketplace often are the first people to get the virus. One of our biggest fears in infectious diseases right now is something called avian flu. That means bird flu. And we know that began in China, and it was from chickens being sold in the market. So how does an animal virus get to a human? It first of all has to be handled closely. So a human who's handling the infected animal runs a risk of getting that virus. But viruses can only attach to get into humans if there's a receptor that allows the virus to attach to it, okay? Then once the human gets infected, that virus has to learn how can it gain transmissibility, okay? So when the animal virus gets into human, it's very virulent. And virulent means it can cause severe disease. When it gains transmissibility, it loses some of that virulence. So the more transmissible it becomes, the lower the virulence and pathogenicity is. That means it doesn't cause as much disease or severe disease, okay? And that's the trick, is that virus has to get smart enough to learn how to be transmitted human to human. So this began in a place called Wuhan, China, that people would not have heard about before the virus outbreak occurred. And you all know that the Chinese tried to keep it a secret, okay, for a long time. And as a science person, and I know there are other people watching who are science people too, truth is important in order for us to understand any issue. And we have to be able to tell people what's going on, what we did to approach the problem, so we all can understand how to better handle the issue. So truth in science is critical, and transparency is critical. And so it went on in China for several months, and they instituted these very severe measures. Now, my friend in China told me that he's a biochemist, and he did not go to the hospital because once that hospital was had a housed a patient with the illness, we call it COVID, right? Coronavirus disease. The virus is actually called SARS-2 2019 to say that it was first identified in 2019, and it's a variant of the SARS virus. Okay. Now I'll get technical for a second, and then I'll get back to my friend in China. Both the SARS virus, the original one, and SARS-2 attached to something called the angiotensin converting enzyme 2. So all of you people who are taking medicine for hypertension, some of you are on something called an angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. So angiotensin is an enzyme that converts angiotensin into renin, which is in the kidney, and which affects the kidney and causes blood pressure to go up. So if you inhibit this angiotensin converting enzyme, it lowers your blood pressure. Okay. So my first comment is there is no evidence that people who are taking ACE inhibitors, that's the initial ACE inhibitors, should get off their medicine. Okay. We don't think it does anything to people taking the medicine and doesn't make you more susceptible to coronavirus. Okay. But I just want you to know that that enzyme, that second type, type 2, is the receptor for the virus. So in your body, I want to go back to my friend. So he could not leave his house for 25 days because he's a biochemist. He runs a lab in one of the major hospitals in China near Wuhan. And if you weren't essential to patient care, they didn't want you in the hospital. Also, if there was coronavirus in your community, you could not leave your district. You couldn't go to a store. So people had food delivered to their home. And he told me they had no masks. They ran out of swabs. It was horrendous, okay? So that situation was bad. So I'll go back now to the angiotensin converting enzyme, unless anybody has a question. And I'm a lecturer who tends to encourage questioning during my talk, because oftentimes we forget the questions we wanted to ask if you have to wait to the end of the talk. But there are two, so the angiotensin 2 receptor for the virus is found primarily in the lung, okay? That's where the most receptors are. And interesting to my friend and I in China is that the tissue with the second most common higher number of receptors is the small intestine. And when viruses cause diarrhea, they attack the small intestine. Okay, so why am I saying this? Because 20% of the people admitted to the hospital in China had diarrhea. And the question is, why did they get the diarrhea? And my friend and I just wrote a peer-reviewed letter to the British Medical Journal saying that we postulate that because the small intestine has a high number of these angiotensin 2 receptors, that would allow the virus to attach and perhaps cause diarrhea, okay? And diarrhea turns out to be one of the markers for severity of disease, but this is not common knowledge. Now, coronaviruses, the common ones that we see every year here, don't usually cause diarrhea, and they don't cause pneumonia usually, and they cause upper respiratory disease like colds, like I said, because they don't have the receptor in your lung probably to cause pneumonia. This new virus that's circulating attaches to this receptor in your lung, and that's why pneumonia occurs in about 50% of the people who get infected. And the way you manifest with this infection is not with a cold so often, right? Because that's what respiratory viruses usually cause, are colds, but they cause coughing, difficulty breathing, and fever. That's a little bit different than the common viruses that cause colds and upper respiratory tract disease, where runny nose, congestion, and cough are common, okay? So this one's a little bit different and a little more severe. Okay. We know, okay, so when you have contact with the virus, and you get infected, you have an incubation period. And right now, the incubation period, that means before it produces disease, the incubation period looks like it's about 2 weeks, okay? But we think maybe a large percentage of people are asymptomatic. That means they get infected, but they don't have disease, okay? And that percentage might be 20 to 30% are asymptomatic. A higher percentage will have pneumonia manifested by cough and fever and difficulty breathing. And then another 25% maybe have a cold, okay? Very mild. So that's the way the disease manifests. So when you incubate the virus, not everybody's going to get sick and not everyone's going to know you're incubating it unless you're tested for the virus. So you have to be tested to show that you have the virus. Okay. So the latest recommendation from the health department is that if you are known to be infected with the virus and are asymptomatic, if you remain asymptomatic after identifying that you're infected, if you can remain asymptomatic for 7 days, you can come out of your home, go and walk about and work, okay? Now, if you're symptomatic, what they say is you have to be without a fever for 3 days and 7 days have transpired and you've been without fever for at least 3 days, okay? And your symptoms show improvement. Then you can come out of the house, all right? So that is the incubation period. And we're assuming that after those 7 days, you're no longer infectious. Nobody knows for sure if this is true. Now, even if people shed virus, it requires a certain number of viruses to actually cause infection. That's called the multiplicity of infection. How many viruses does it take to infect somebody? Some require just a few viral particles. Some require more viral particles to infect you. So how do you get an infection from someone who has no symptoms? That virus isn't going to jump on you, okay? If someone is infected and the virus is replicating in their upper airway, which it's going to do first, usually, you have to have close contact with that person or contact with their secretions. So let's say they cough or sneeze on a tabletop. That virus will live several hours on the tabletop. And if you put your hand down on that tabletop, or they've sneezed into their hands, like you're not supposed to do anymore, and you don't realize that there's secretions on their hands that dry, that virus is there for probably several hours. You shake their hand. That's why we're telling people not to shake hands with people, because you don't know where their hands have been and what's on their hands, okay? So if they're not symptomatic, you have to either have close contact with them or some object that's had contact with their secretions. Now, if they're symptomatic, that means coughing, they create a spray. The smaller the particle and the spray droplet, the longer it stays in the air. Tuberculosis can stay in the air for a long time. So if you walk through a mist of TB, you can get infected. We know that, okay? And certain other viruses can do this too. But for the sake of discussion today and what we know, we think that 6 feet is the distance that spray is going to spread the virus and perhaps infect you. Okay, that's all I can tell you. And I don't really want to get into the arguments about what's the size of the droplet or how long it will stay in the air. But the people who are symptomatic are going to spread it by coughing or sneezing. All right. we recommend that people wash their hands. Now, I can tell you that washing your hands for every infectious disease I can think of, even the respiratory viruses, is the critical thing that that you can do. It's the mechanical scrubbing and rinsing that get rid of non-resident infectious agents. Non-resident infectious agent means those that you pick up serendipitously along the way. If you wash it with soap and water, it usually goes away. Water-based alcohol gels are what everyone is using today. And I don't know that much about the effect of that alcohol on this virus. I'm assuming it does something to the virus and that can inactivate it, and so people are using it, and that seems to be a recommendation. But in general, soap and water is what I would recommend, okay? There is no drug to treat it, despite what you might read on internet. So only use reliable information sources like me or the CDC, or people who know what they're talking about and follow the literature. Don't use any other cockamamie recommendation. There is no vaccine. It will take a while to develop a vaccine. I don't know if this virus is going to circulate, like Tony Fauci has said, a second time. SARS disappeared. MERS only was restricted to places that have camels, okay? I don't know if this is going to come around a second time. We'll just have to wait and see. But it will disappear. Respiratory virus season in the United States is winter and early spring. So December through March is usually when we see it. And then they disappear. They go to the southern hemisphere where it's their winter. I don't know where these viruses go. No one has figured out what happens to these viruses, where they disappear in the off season, okay? But we know that in places where in the southern hemisphere, their winter, the viruses we see in our winter, they see in their winter, okay? So I think that's really the state of the art right now. And I don't think we have reached a peak yet in Erie County or in New York State. And I think the reporting in the Buffalo News about how many cases we're seeing and how many have been hospitalized and how many people have passed away is fairly accurate. The one interesting thing about the science of this outbreak is there is no pathological reports yet on what the tissues look like that have been infected with the virus. And that's very weird. Usually we see pathology here. So when I spoke to my friend in China about that, he said every person who died with the virus was cremated. So there was no tissue to examine. All right. So we don't know enough about this particular virus. I think I've spoken enough, and I'd welcome any questions at this point.
And please remember to unmute yourself if you have a question. And I'd say if anyone has a question, just jump in.
Thank you, Doctor. Oh, somebody's ahead of me. This is Judy. I'd like to go after. I'd like to go after whoever just spoke.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
It's Sheila. Hi. My son, who's in his mid-30s, has had a dormant asthma for many, many years. He's become very physically active, used to work out at a gym, but there's not a day that goes by that he doesn't do things to promote optimum health. He works in the healthcare field. Around the beginning of March, his wife came down with influenza B. She stayed at home and rested and did what she needed to do, and they went on a trip to Florida. Their 4-year-old son had 104 fever, and they took him to an immediate care down there, and there was something very sketchy about the x-ray. They said that he didn't seem like he was getting enough air in his lungs, and they immediately came home and went to the pediatrician, who said it was just a bad x-ray. With all that being said, my son came down with influenza B. He had the fever, the cough, his asthma was way out of control. Now he's convinced that this was not an ordinary influenza. So my question to you is, because he's still exhibiting a cough, He's still using an inhaler, 2 inhalers, which he hasn't done in years. He's taking 2 weeks off from his job at his healthcare facility now just to be on the safe side. Do you think that this was the coronavirus? And do the symptoms after you're quote unquote relatively cured, do they linger on? He has not had any fever whatsoever, but he's got a dry cough. And when I talk to him, his nose sounds so congested all the time. And I have been in his company 6 feet away just to visit him and make sure he's okay. But he also has a son who has really bad asthma. He's got an immune deficiency problem that was diagnosed at a very early age at Children's Hospital, and he cannot afford to be around anybody sick. And yet, oddly enough, out of the whole family, he's the only one who hasn't caught this.
All right, so I want to make sure I understand your question. Could he have had or have coronavirus?
Right.
That's your question.
And
Okay,
is it still lingering on?
okay, so there are dual infections where you have two different viruses infecting an individual. But, you know, influenza virus, and this year it was odd that it began with B as opposed to A.
Right.
In that setting, I already had one person with documented influenza B. The second person then had influenza B, and I would guess that influenza B was a major culprit in all of this, but I couldn't possibly say whether or not he had coronavirus. The other thing is, I've already told you that if you had a coronavirus and were symptomatic, they say after 7 days. Now, these are not definites. You know, nothing in science is absolute. Everything is relative depending upon the information available at the time we say something. I would say after 7 days, and I don't know if asthma is any different, and I don't know if they're using medications like inhaled steroids,
Right.
which may prolong a viral process.
Oh.
I would, because steroids inhibit the immune response to most agents, infectious agents. I would say that, you know, after 7 days, if he didn't have any other explanation for it, he's probably not going to be infectious. And if he's been 14 days since the start of this, I would say definitely he's probably okay to go about his
Good.
business.
So you would just think that this is just his asthma that's causing all these upper respiratory problems for him? Because he said he feels okay.
You know, I always tell you this, I'll tell everyone how I approach a patient. I have to take the history myself. I have to examine the patient myself, and then I'll tell you what I think. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is Judy. Thank you, Dr. Faden, for being here. I really appreciate the scientific explanation. It's actually much easier to comprehend and to consume. My question is, so everybody on this line knows I've got a 92-year-old dad. He lives at home. He's fairly healthy. He's taking a walk a day. How careful should I be on things like receiving mail, reading the paper? We're wiping off all groceries before they come in, but what specifically on mail and paper and things that people are used to on a daily basis?
Right. Okay, so when I talked about the surface, the virus surviving on a surface, I can tell you this, that viruses don't survive very long on porous surfaces, like the clothing you're wearing, which is porous, or paper, which is porous. Porous meaning P-O-R-O-U-S, little holes in it. It will not survive long. In a non-porous surface like a Formica top table, it will survive longer. And viruses, if they're mixed with protein, like in saliva or sputum, they stay even longer. So I would not be too afraid about the paper, for instance, okay? I don't know about the groceries. I mean, everyone is wiping down after we go shopping. My wife is doing the same thing to make sure there's no virus there. I don't know how to answer that question, but I want to say that if you're 92, you should be very cautious. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, by the way, I'm sure that was a nice compliment for our health commissioner. I'm sure her parents who are on this call
Oh, really?
appreciated hearing that. So and I'm not sure you're going to be able to do this, but I'm going to ask you to get out your crystal ball for a minute. And we see in so many other countries where they have basically put people in lockdown, they've quarantined them entirely. We're now here in Erie County we're like 10 days into a period where the governor said, you know, non-essential workers stay home. So a lot of us are home, but we're still, you know, we go to the grocery store, or we, you know, make deliveries to an elderly parent like Judy is doing, things like that. Do you foresee, as we get closer and closer to our peak number of cases, that they might take that more drastic action? Would you advise that?
Okay, I don't think I'm in a position to answer that, but I can tell you that, let me first begin by describing, comparing and contrasting the United States to other societies. The United States is a, quote, pioneer society, and the people tend to be very independent, and we're very heterogeneous. And getting consensus from Americans on any one issue is difficult. Now, in contrast, if you go to Japan, and I've been to Japan about 9 times because I collaborate with Japanese scientists there, they're very obedient, and everybody does what they're told. And no one wants to be distinctive. They want to be like everybody else. So it's easy to implement rules that everyone's going to follow, okay? So I think that it's hard in the United States to get people to follow what's recommended. And I think we have to be a little more careful in the United States because people break the rules all the time. That sense of independence and don't tread on me like I'm one of the flags, you know, that kind of bravado exists in the United States. Now, every country is doing it a little bit differently. I just saw the article in today's paper about Sweden. Now, all the Scandinavian countries have been somewhat restrictive in what they're allowing people to do, but Sweden has only closed their schools, public schools and colleges. And they're allowing everyone else to go about their business, making sure that they social distance, if that's an accepted term nowadays. And that seems to be working in Sweden. Now, I would like to compliment the Koreans in their approach, because what they did was they had a test available right away, and they tested a lot of people so they could identify all those with the virus, and many of them with the virus, and they knew those people had to be careful, okay? So they didn't do what China did, but they tested so many more people. Now, China, Korea, South Korea now we're talking about, is not as big as China. I mean, when you're talking about, you know, close to 2 billion people versus, you know, the United States, which has 380 million people, it's a different ball game. But I think that I would rely on, right now, the health departments to make their recommendations, and we should try to follow them as best we can. Yeah.
I have a question that was sent by chat from Darcy Kramer. This could read it for you. And he writes, I've heard physicians talk about viruses in an anthropomorphic way. The virus has to learn, it was smart, it's been effective. Can you comment on that?
Well, I actually approached that a little bit earlier. I think the virus, if an animal is an intermediary in this, it first has to learn how is it going to get into a human. And then once it's in the human, it has to learn how to be transmissible. And so that means it's got to undergo some kind of, when we say learn, viruses don't have a brain, you know, they're not they're not even a cellular organism. They're subcellular, right? They're nucleic acids of some sort. Some have envelopes, and some are quote, naked viruses. So what they have to do is undergo mutation. And when they mutate, that mutation is the way they become educated. Now, a virus, in order to survive, has to replicate inside of a cell. And that means it has to learn how to attach to the cell. And so there is a surface protein, usually, and that's what those little spikes on the coronavirus are these surface proteins that are the attachment mechanism that then finds a receptor, in this case, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor, and it sticks to it. So now that it's attached to the cell, it can't survive there. It has to get inside the cell. So now it has to figure out a way for its membranes to fuse with the cell's membrane and then enter the cell in some kind of vacuole, okay? Oh, that reminds me now. So now this virus gets inside a cell and is in a vacuole is like a balloon, I guess, inside the cell. And it's then going to get out of that balloon and use the machinery in that cell to replicate and form a new bunch of viruses. And then it has to figure out how to get out of that cell and spread. Okay, so when I say a virus gets educated, it has to undergo some kind of mutation that will allow it to survive, but it needs a cell, a living cell, to replicate and survive.
Dan, there's another question on the chat.
I always tell students, ask me hard questions, because hard questions force me to think. And if I don't know something, I'll say, I really don't know. But I don't mind, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. Okay, I truly believe that.
I'm going to read the other question.
Some of you are teachers, and you might disagree with me, but I think every question is legitimate.
Okay, there's another one sent by chat. This is from Dan Farber.
I think someone was going to say something, weren't they?
Yes. Yes, I have a question if possible.
Yeah.
Does the determination as to the infectability of the virus, is that predicated on how it can tend to mutate? You say that it has to get into a cell and then replicate itself by mutation.
Yeah,
Thus, it can change and have various types of mutations.
Yes.
Correct.
Usually
does that change the scope of the drug or the virus?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Why do we have so much trouble with influenza viruses? Because those surface glycoproteins in the influenza virus has something called a hemagglutinin on its surface and a neuraminidase spike on its surface. The hemagglutinin allows it to stick to cells, and then once it's replicated in the cells, the neuraminidase allows it to be released from the surface of the cell, okay? But the hemagglutinins and neuraminidase vary on influenza viruses. You have H1 all the way through H9, but the higher numbers are animal, usually fowl influenza viruses. And you have neuraminidase, you have 2 types, okay? So when they change and no one is immune, they can get infected. But if they become immune to that particular hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, they'll be protected against it. But those hemagglutinins can change dramatically, like go from H1 to H2 to H3. That's a dramatic shift. Or it can drift. It can have a minor change in the hemagglutinin. It's still going to be an H1 or an H2 or an H3, but there is an antigenic change, and that has to be a result of some mutation in the virus that is not fully recognized by the person who had the previous H1 and now has, that drift is a little bit different. The antigenic structure of the hemagglutinin is slightly different. Then it's going to have less protection.
So I guess my question then basically was, if you're saying that changes from an H1 to an H2, possibly to an H3, if you develop an immunity to the H1, could you be then infected by the H2 mutation?
Oh, sure. Well, okay, H2 is an entirely different virus, and yes, you could be infected. There's no cross protection.
In other words, if it does mutate, you can be infected by the mutation where you are maybe fine with the original.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Well, that just makes us all happy. Thank you.
I don't know anything about protection in this virus, by the way. And I'm going to I'll get a little esoteric, okay? So there are viruses, the sicker a virus makes you, usually the better the immune response, all right?
Okay.
The milder the virus, the less robust the immune response. Milder infection, the milder the infection, the less robust the immune response. The best immunity occurs in viruses that cause viremia. That means the virus gets into the bloodstream and it makes you very sick. We know that when you get immune to a virus that causes a viremia, that immunity tends to be lifelong. But if the virus only replicates on a surface in the airway or in your gut, you get a lot of local immunity, but you don't get good immunity in your blood because the virus hasn't entered your blood. So those common respiratory viruses that circulate each year, like rhinovirus, that gets its name from the word rhino meaning nose, the common cold virus, or RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, or parainfluenza virus, those don't enter your bloodstream very usually, and therefore you can get repeated infections each year with the same virus, but the repeated infections tend to be milder. So the coronavirus that we commonly see circulating, remember I told you there are 4 that recur every year, those probably don't cause viremia, and you get reinfected with them, but you get milder disease. I don't know enough about this new coronavirus to say that there'll be lifelong immunity, or you can be susceptible with a second episode, a second occurrence, or introduction of the virus. Okay.
Howard, why do you have any ideas?
I hear you.
Okay. In the U.S.,
I don't know why there's feedback unless you have two electrical devices.
You have 2 things.
Okay, turn yours on. Okay.
Okay.
Why
don't you type your message instead under chat?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, turn this thing off. Why does it seem that we're having a different epidemiology to the infection here in the US? We just heard of a toddler dying, so we have younger people having serious disease compared to what we were hearing in Italy and China, where it seemed to be serious disease mostly in the elderly. Do you think we're just that much different underlying diseases? What's your hypothesis?
I think that it's too premature to say our epidemiology is any different. I am certain that infants died in China, okay? I just don't think we can, we're looking at such, and I know your husband knows, that the N has to be big to find significance statistically. And when you're dealing with a small number of people, like we are in Erie County, I wouldn't draw too many conclusions about the epidemiology. Okay?
Hi.
This is Judy Feldman again. I have a quick question on the herd approach. There's a lot in social media about herd and your thoughts on.
Well, herd immunity means that, and it varies with the infectious agent. When you can immunize or expose enough people to the infectious agent that you have a large population of non-susceptibles, they won't participate in transmission of the agent, and therefore the number of new cases declines. That's why immunization is important. So as a pediatrician, I'm going to put a plug in here. Please have your children and grandchildren immunized. The people who are choosing not to immunize in the United States tend to be the better educated, if I can use that term loosely, the better educated and the wealthier, because they want a risk-free society. They're risk adverse. But if we stop immunizing, we will see these diseases reemerge. So please, we want a lot of people protected against infectious diseases that are critical to our society. And that means either natural infection or immunization. That's herd immunity. Okay.
We have a whole bunch of chatted questions sent by chat. So I'm going to pick a couple that I think are the most general interest and ask you those. And one is, what do you do if you're out of Lysol and other antiviral cleaners? What can you use to disinfect?
Soap and water, clean a surface, that's all.
Okay.
My kids and my wife hear me say that every time they get a scratch or something. I always say soap and water. And so that's what I recommend.
Another question is that someone heard, and I've heard this too, that Motrin is not good to take with a virus, or one of the, what can you take and what can you not take?
Yeah, okay. I'm unaware there's any evidence that says don't take Motrin right now. That means Motrin is a brand, but the drug is ibuprofen. I'm unaware that that is not recommended. We know that certain, there used to be, okay, I'm trying to remember, I don't want to misspeak here, but aspirin is not recommended for certain infectious diseases because it can lead to another disease. So right now, I would say I'm unaware of anything contraindication to the use of aspirin or acetaminophen or ibuprofen with this virus.
Okay. Another person asks, after the 15 days that we have.
14.
Getting better. And people resume contact again, won't the epidemic simply start again? And I guess we hear a lot about the flattening of the curve. Right. And my understanding is that basically just stretches out the time period during which people get sick, but the same number of people will get sick. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know. No, so it flattens the curve, meaning that not as many people will get infected, and not as many people will have severe disease and die, because you're reducing the mass of people infected at one time. Okay, so we want to decrease the number of people infected. The question is, how long do you keep these restrictions in place? And we'll know better when we see the curve of cases. If you stop too early, there'll be a resurgence. That's right. So this is where the experts come in who have seen these things over historical periods many times, and they'll determine when they think we're in a safe area. Yeah.
Hi, this is Ed Fine calling. Does a angiotensin receptor blocker taken on a chronic basis perhaps protect you, person, from acquiring COVID-19?
Yeah. The answer is, at this point, no.
Well, I am respecting social distancing, physical distancing.
All right, yeah, and don't stop taking your angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor.
Thank you.
Dan, I have another question. It's about testing. Obviously, one of the things we know is we just haven't tested enough people yet. You know, are we going to see enough tests out there for people? Are we going to have a better handle on this? And are we going to be able to test that people have it or had it previously?
Yeah, that's so, a test, right? The tests we're talking about are diagnosing who has the virus, right? Okay. So that's where the United States lagged. It didn't develop a reliable test early enough. And this is where the Koreans shone. They got a good test, started using it, identified who needed to be careful, who you need to stay away from, and we failed. And so yes, there'll be more tests available. And I just saw an article in today's paper, somewhere in the front A section of the Buffalo News, that Abbott has developed a rapid test, which means they will have an answer within 15 minutes of putting the sample in. So, you know, we have these rapid tests in doctors' offices for flu and RSV. So I think the rapid test is what we are going to look forward to. And so the FDA has just approved that rapid test. I don't know how that's going to be employed and much about it, but yes, we need better tests and more of them. That's been a real issue.
Sheila asks, do you think it is relatively safe for the elderly to go into public grocery stores such as Wegmans? And I guess one question there is what would elderly be?
Your question to me is, what is elderly?
Her question was, is it safe for elderly people to go to a place like Wegmans?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say that if you're, well, I'm in the older group, so I have to be careful.
Most of us are.
Okay. I would say that if you're older, and I mean anyone over the age of 60, okay, but the critical age, I do have to tell you, is when you're getting close to 80. 80 seems to be a very defining period for severe disease. But it isn't just age, it's comorbidities, right? It's what else you have that might increase your susceptibility to severe disease, not to the infection, but severe disease. And I wrote down from an article that came from China that was very large, and here are the comorbidities. The coronary vascular disease. So if you're known to have significant coronary artery disease, or have had a heart attack, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes, if you put that in conjunction with age, that becomes important. So if you're a healthy 70-year-old with well-controlled high blood pressure, I don't think that would put you at great risk. But if you have a very labile blood pressure that's difficult to grow, difficult to control, and you're on multiple drugs for blood pressure, if you have diabetes, I'd say, yeah, these are some of the things that you have to be careful of. Yeah, and I would have other people do your shopping for you. Yes, that's what I would do. Now, some of us don't have that. Some people in the community don't have anyone to do their shopping for them. And then I know a lot of places are delivering, right? So have them. Last night, we took out food from a restaurant, one of the better restaurants in Amherst, and had dinner together with friends. So, but we're still trying to stay away. We're not shaking hands, we're not kissing, you know. But yeah, so I would say those are the risk factors for the people who are older. And I would ask other people to shop for them if that's available to them. Yeah.
Thank you. Brian, who's a pharmacist, asked, is the response to the virus T-cell mediated or B-cell mediated? And if B-cell mediated, is there severe danger in those with B-cell deficiency? And I have no idea what I just asked.
Okay, so in your bloodstream, you've got white blood cells, right? And the two groups are lymphocytes primarily and neutrophils. And neutrophils take care of bacterial disease, and lymphocytes take care of everything. Okay, so in your lymphocytes, you've got those that make antibody, and those are B cells. And then there are T cells that have memory cells, which give you lifelong immunity, okay? And they also assist in helping B cells make antibody. I don't think we have a lot of data on the cellular immune response to this virus. I can tell you we measure antibody. That has been done, okay? But I don't think I've seen any significant reports on B cells and T cells. So I can't answer your question. But I just taught you about B cells and T cells.
Sorry, Brian. Okay, Audrey asks, she says, I am a home health pediatric private duty nurse with one client. Should she be masking in the home? And she says it's because it's difficult to keep the distance with a child. Should she wear a mask? And let me expand that question. Should the rest of us wear masks if we can get them?
Okay, so I think that for the person who is housebound, Audrey, if other people are coming into the house, maybe they should have mask, okay? But yes, a mask either way would protect them from someone who gets close within 6 feet. Yes, a standard mask is probably going to trap large droplets. And right now, that's what we think is transmitting this virus in the air, large droplets, okay? When we are doing a procedure on a patient and we're creating aerosolized small particles, then we recommend this more sophisticated mask that people call the N95 or a respirator mask. And those are the ones that the hospitals need to have available for certain kinds of procedures. But a regular mask will interfere with transmission. Now, someone has asked me whether coffee filters made into a mask can work, because there's something on the internet. I know coffee filters are good for making coffee, okay? But I don't know how good they are in preventing this virus from getting to your nose. Oh, by the way, when you get it on your hand, let's say, how do you get infected with this? The virus has to be on a mucosal surface, okay? So it has to be like a fingertip, and you rub your eye or you pick your nose. And we know both picking your nose and rubbing your eye are common. But if you get the virus on your hand, that's why you say keep your hands away from your face. I'm unaware that viruses that cause respiratory disease commonly are transmitted in the mouth, like swallowing it. But this virus, I already told you, looks like it can replicate in the small intestine. So maybe it can, but normally if you take a cold virus like a rhinovirus and put it in your mouth, you do not get a cold. But if you put that virus in your eyes or your nose, you get a cold. So I don't think we know enough about this virus yet to say you can ingest it, okay? Meaning eating it. All right.
Dr. Fagan, what do you do if, and this is once again a family member, you wonder why I'm worried to go out. I had controlled high blood pressure until all this came about. My daughter works in an office that's essential. She works in shipping, and it's physically impossible for them to separate 6 feet from one another. It's not a large enough office. Her boss refuses to let anybody go out on, work from the home, which concerns her because she's got a toddler who has very bad asthma and has had pneumonia twice this year. And, her job is on the line and she certainly needs to work. And, this has been a really aggravating and emotionally stressful time for her. And she has immune problems, having celiac. So do you recommend that she stays away from that scenario? Or her doctor said she'd be fine if she went to work. But how could you be fine if you're sitting on top of people?
Remember, if the people around her are not symptomatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then she's not going to get the virus from them unless she touches them or something that they're using. So washing her hands becomes very, very important.
Should she wear a mask at work?
I would. I think that's up to her. I don't want to make her.
Okay. Alrighty, thank you.
Okay, I have another question here, I think from Julia. One of the things you mentioned was that people can shed virus even if they are asymptomatic.
Right.
If we are not testing people who have no symptoms, how
Right.
can we know when it is safe to allow people to congregate again?
Okay, well, so we're going to say that if you've had contact with someone who had coronavirus, or if you'd been in a community where it was rampant, like New York City, then potentially you're infectious for 14 days. Okay, so I think that's all I have to say is that I can't tell you, but don't kiss, don't drink out of common glasses, don't shake hands, don't high five people. You know, I don't know if you have to go. No, you can elbow people. You know, but I don't. That's all. I don't know. I can't answer that any better.
Okay.
Now you did promise me lunch and dinner for doing this, didn't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Bruce will take care of it.
And now please have it delivered to my house. All right.
Someone asks, when should we expect to return to the office? I kind of have a feeling you don't know.
Yeah.
But I'll let you answer that.
No, I think we just have to wait to get the word from in our area, from the county commissioner. The county.
That was my question. My name is Jessica. I've gotten various information from my doctors who are still seeing patients to doctors who are not seeing patients. My boss who is allowed to go in. We have one person at a time doing essential work. We work in a law office. So I'm just trying to figure out, are we looking at maybe May or are we looking at July in terms of how this curve moves exponentially with time?
Yeah, I don't think we can even say that yet because we haven't seen enough data on the curve yet. It would help us to know if we tested a lot of people, how many people in the community were infected. Okay, I saw the headline on today's paper saying that it's everywhere, the virus. So I would rely on the health department right now for recommendations, but I did give you recommendations about people who were known to be infected when they could go back to work. So the CDC is saying now that if you were infected with the virus, right, and were symptomatic, you can go back to work after 7 days of identification, having a test that identified you as being affected, as long as you had no fever for 3 days and your symptoms were improving. They were saying, essentially, you're not infectious. If you were asymptomatic but had been tested because of the relationship you had with someone who was infected and symptomatic, but you didn't develop any symptoms, you can go back to work after 7 days of having a positive test that said you were infected. Otherwise, it's 14 days of isolation. But I think
I have a quick
I can't
question.
say about your particular business. And
I'm concerned about bringing my 80-year-old grandmother to a nephrology appointment or an eye doctor appointment or something like that. How
Yeah.
would you recommend going about that? Is it best to reschedule for 6 months, or is it best just?
Yeah, I would say if it's a routine checkup, yeah, I would delay it. I mean, I think dentists are at great risk, and so they have been canceling routine visits and only seeing emergencies. And I think that's appropriate for a dentist. Yeah.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Marina.
Okay.
And I can see you too.
Yes. What I am still seeing emergency patients and diabetics and that kind of thing as needed if they feel they need to come in. But we are quickly running out of things like the Clorox wipes for our chairs and stuff like that. I'm planning to mix some Clorox with water possibly, and I have soap and water, which I've planned, also told the girls would just wash down the chairs. Do they air dry, or can I dry those chairs? In other words, once I wash the surface, chairs for the patients with soap and water, should I allow them to air dry?
So everyone should know that Clorox, a 10% solution, Clorox, you take Clorox and you dilute it and make a 10% solution, is probably the best disinfectant that you can find. Okay, but Clorox smells badly and can be irritating after a while, okay? But Clorox is really good. In order for a disinfectant to work, it has to be on the surface long enough to disinfect. So in the hospital, we don't recommend you wipe off disinfectants. I mean, skin disinfection and disinfectants, because we want them to air dry. When you go to have a blood test drawn, and I'm sure you've all had blood tests in your lifetime, the real recommendation for cleaning the skin is taking the alcohol swab and rubbing it in a circular motion, increasing the circle size for 30 seconds. Now, 30 seconds, just time it sometimes. How long is 30 seconds? And you're going to see that when you go to have a blood test, I would say 100% of the time, then that's not being done. But that's the current recommendation, that the alcohol on your skin be applied for 30 seconds before they consider it disinfected. And so we often say, let it air dry, but it has to be there for, I can't give you a specific time, Marina, but I think it has to sit there for a while to disinfect. Then you can wipe it off, but I don't know what that time is.
Okay, thanks.
We had a question about the vaccine. Basically, when do you expect that we would have one? And if you talk about vaccines a bit.
Right. So Tony, Dr. Fauci, by the way, of all the characters that have appeared on television daily for the report on this virus, Tony Fauci is probably the most reliable source that appears on that stage. Okay. So he is the director of the National Institute on Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Okay. So he said it's going to be a year to a year and a half before a vaccine is developed. So once a vaccine is developed, they have to try it in people to make sure it's safe first, and two, it produces antibody, right? It protect, and then three, does it protect? Safe? Does it produce an antibody response? And is that antibody response protective? That takes time. Science is a slow process. And if anyone's ever been in the lab doing research, it is long and frustrating to complete experiments and know that they're reliable. Yeah, okay.
Somewhat political question.
Oh, yeah.
Which health department is more credible right now, New York State or the federal?
So I think the New York State Department of Health, the commissioner is Howard Zucker. And Howard Zucker has done a great job. We've been blessed in New York State with having pretty good health commissioners. Okay, so I would say the health commissioner, what we're getting out of New York State is reliable, but don't forget the health departments for every state are linked to the Center for Disease Control. And now I'll make a political comment about the CDC. So I've been in infectious diseases for oh my God, 43 and 46 years, okay? And every young person who went into infectious diseases, if they were smart, they went into the CDC's EIS service. That's the Epidemiology Intelligence Service. That was considered one of the best places to get training in epidemiology and infectious diseases. And when I became fully trained as an ID guy and came to Buffalo, if I ever had a question and I called the CDC, there were experts there in every area who could answer my questions. They were the world's resource for public health, okay? But I would say, I don't want to name a president, but over the past 20 years, at least, the CDC has become politicized. And when you do that, you end up blindsiding science and making science keep quiet about things they should be speaking out about. So I would say the CDC is no longer, quote, the world's reference for public health. And it's to my dismay that I've seen that change occur. And what we need to do is separate public health from politics. In that article today about Sweden, if anyone saw it, I don't know if it was Sweden or another Scandinavian country. They have a law that separates public health programs and policy from the politics. They're totally independent. So the director of the public health program in those Scandinavian countries does not report to the president. They're independent. And that's the way it should be.
Do we have any other questions?
I'm kind of just curious on a personal note, for levity purposes, like what are you doing to, when you're self-isolating, and what are you looking forward to at the end of all of this?
Andy, are you here? My wife is here, so she doesn't want me to do anything, okay? But so what I've been doing, so at work, I'm obviously the senior member in the Department of Pediatrics, to tell you the truth. And I stopped seeing patients 3 years ago, and well, 2 years ago, and stopped being the chief 3 years ago. But I'm still full-time. I'm very active in writing and teaching, and I attend on the floors as a teaching attending a couple times a year. And I miss the office setting and the people working there. But I've been avoiding going in during the day. So I will go, I brought home my computer and I'm working from my dining room table. But I go in at night or on weekends when there are less people there and do some of the things that I need to do at work. And my younger colleagues say, please don't come in. I don't know if it's because they don't want to hear my opinion about anything, or they know I'm vulnerable. So, but when we enter the hospital, no matter if you're an employee or a patient, they screen you by asking you, are you sick? Have you had a fever, a cough, a difficulty breathing? And then they take your temperature. And they would not let me come in if I had a fever, that's for sure. Okay, that wasn't very evidence, though.
Well, I have 3 friends whose weddings have been canceled due to this. So we get together for Zoom similarly and, you know, just kind of brainstorm and share appreciations, which is a lot of fun, as we look forward to postponing weddings probably for a year.
This is a real tragedy. I had a meeting in Galveston, Texas I was supposed to go to on, it's related to a talk I give on climate change, which is fascinating. It's how climate change has affected vector-borne diseases, and vectors are insect-borne diseases. And there was a big meeting down in Galveston that was canceled. But every scientific meeting, and there's one that has 30,000 attendees, they canceled that. You can just imagine what that does to the city, where the convention center is, and the hotels, and all the scientists who want to present their research. This is devastating. And I know from a personal standpoint, when you cancel a wedding, that's a big deal. I know. This is a real tragedy. It is. Yeah. Okay. Nice.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Follow up on what you just said about climate change.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any connection that we haven't had an pandemic like this in 100 years? The fact that it's happening right now when climate change seems to be kicking in, do you see any potential connection there?
Yeah, that's really an interesting question. So my talk is based on insect-borne diseases, in particular mosquitoes, where the climate that has changed is changing their geographic distribution, therefore the distribution of the diseases they transmit. And I'm focusing on insects, which then transmit bacterial, parasitic, and viral diseases. So we're seeing changes in those kinds of diseases. But you could be sure that even non-vector-borne infectious diseases, their geography and their epidemiology is changing because of climate change. Just think about waterborne diseases, how the water level of the ocean has risen and the temperature of the water has changed, and bacteria grow better in warmer temperatures. So I think, yes, this is all interconnected. Okay, nice meeting everybody and chatting this morning.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Quite welcome.
Hey, Dan, if I could just one last thing before we go. Again, Dr. Faden, thank you for doing this. Rabbi Alex, thank you for reaching out. I just want to say to the temple members, just continue to watch your emails. Anything we have that's important, if there's any change, any important information, we will get it to you as soon as we possibly can. And we will continue to offer as many things as we can like this on Zoom or Facebook Live, and continue to be there for you. So just keep watching, and anytime we can get stuff to you, we will do so. And thank you all for your
I have one final
understanding and
thought.
patience.
I want to compliment the rabbi on his Torah thoughts that come as notifications. Those are wonderful. And they're short enough that you can read the whole thing and get the message. So please continue with Torah thoughts on the app, the Temple app. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And if I didn't
Thank
get
you
to
so
your
much.
question, sorry about that. But thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everyone for setting it up.
Good to see everybody again.
Good to see you too.
Great program.
Bye-bye.